Okay, Chevra. Good morning. So let's continue where we left off yesterday, which was in the middle of this Imrei Yaakov. There's a little bit of a discrepancy in the poskim as to when you can appoint a representative to represent you in collecting a debt or even to going to Beis Din, what we call in the vernacular a towing. So we saw yesterday that there are various different minhagim that are some Batei Din accept a towing, some Batei Din do not accept a towing, but it's pretty much accepted in larger cases that there will be a towing, at least a lawyer, to be able to present why legally you should be your side should be entitled to prevail. But here in the halacha, what we're talking about is appointing a person not to be your court representative, but to be the person who speaks with your lova, with your debtor, to prevail upon him to pay his debt and to speak to him, especially in a situation where you know that it's, let's say the malva, the creditor, is conflict averse and really doesn't want to have to face his debtor directly. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch felt that this was not a proper thing to do. That when two people live in the same town, they should communicate directly and not involve a third party. However, one of the reasons why the Rav Shulchan Aruch felt it was not advised is even in a situation where you feel that it's going to be harder for you because you're not as articulate in getting your point across, and you want to get a guy who's going to be able to be a little bit more aggressive and professional and get the guy to pay his loan. So you want to go to like a collection agency or something. So he says, he quoted the Ramah as saying that even that's not a good reason to do it. Aval hashach hisigalav, the shach disagreed, and he holds that no, that de'ein bazeh chisaron b'meshu bal tainos yoser, that if the guy is more effective in being able to present why the debtor owes him money, then there's nothing wrong with hiring him or asking him to do you the favor. Kevin shehu toein emes, because he's just telling the truth, but he's articulating it better. Eladavke hecha shehalovahu olimu baltanos v'hamal ve'ena rotza l'riv imo im kein zehu shehu murshalo tovosa shemisarbe al riv lo. He says it's only when the malva is just like intimidated by his debtor, because the guy's a little bit of a character, he's a little bit aggressive, and he doesn't want to have to go up against him. And so he asks the guy to do him a favor and do it for him. He says it's not because this other guy is going to be able to be more effective, but just he wants to avoid having the confrontation. That's what the Shach says, that's the only time that it's not appropriate for another person to get involved. And the reason is the malo lihis arev sheyitva'enu hamal va'atzmo. He says, why should the attitude of the third party should be, this is between you and him. It's none of my business. Why should I get involved? The two of you, if you lent the guy money, you should be prepared to ask him for it back. It's just that it's uncomfortable for him. Right? So there's a difference between where the lova says, I don't owe you the money, and you don't have the valid, let's say, you don't feel confident in being able to argue your case, then you can get a lawyer involved. But if you know what the arguments are, you have all the paperwork, you have the promissory notes, but you don't enjoy confrontation, that's the only time, according to the Shach, where it's not proper to get a third party involved. But it's certainly what's true is that in a situation where the lova is a cunning, aggressive fellow and wants to come up with all manner of reasons why he shouldn't have to pay back in the timely fashion that he committed himself to, then you're allowed to get a third party to do the work for you. He says, and he won't have such chutzpah in front of the third party. So you want to get the Rav involved. You want to get a lawyer involved. There's nothing wrong with that if indeed the lov is giving you the runaround or is giving you a hard time. And the two examples he gives is if the third party that you want to enlist to help you is either an Adam Chashuv, he's well respected in the community, or he's a person who clearly knows business and he knows contract law and so forth. In that situation, it's perfectly permitted to be that third party, to act as the advocate for the creditor. Because then you're actually doing a mitzvah. You're helping a person who would not normally be able to do it himself. So that's when it's okay. The lekabo chisaron va'adarabahu osa mitzvah. And I says, and I really don't understand, says Rav Stern, why the Rav Shulchan Aruch wouldn't clarify this point. In other words, don't give us a blanket statement based on a pasuk in Yecheskel that you shouldn't butt into someone else's affairs gratuitously and say that applies to all cases where you're asked to be a third party to intervene to collect the debt. It depends. When should you not butt in? When the Malva is perfectly capable of presenting the same arguments that you are. You have no greater knowledge, no greater standing in the community, but it's just that he's a bit of a nebish and he doesn't like controversy. He doesn't like conflict. Then you should say to the guy, listen, my friend, there comes a time in life where we all have to stand up for ourselves, and you got to go ahead and you should encourage him to do so and not get involved, right? Enable the guy instead of protecting him. But in a situation where the loaf is giving them the runaround and he's already tried, and you feel that through your influence or your standing or your knowledge, you can make a difference in having the loaf pay back the debt that he rightfully owes, then absolutely you have a mitzvah to try and help your friend collect his debt. Okay. Right. And then the last thing that we said in this halacha, Abal hababa harsha min hanochri al Yisrael, lo tov osa b'chol inyan. He says, but if you are acting as an advocate for a Gentile creditor to extract money from a fellow Jew, that's not a good thing. That's not geschmack. He says it's better not to get involved. So this is a problem if that's going to just be the standalone halacha. So what right does another yid have to be a lawyer to take a Jew to court? What? Right. How? I mean, just because the guy's a Gentile, does that mean that I can't take on his case if I know for a fact that the Jew owes him money? Okay. So v'yesh omrim demidina ena yachol lihios morsha. The harsha midin shlichus naguba, the kaimelan dein shlichus lenachri. Ulam b'shulchan aruch nifsak b'mahani ayin sham. He says, some say that even halachically, you can't become a morsha, you can't become an appointee of a Gentile, because halachically a Gentile cannot appoint you as a shaliach. He's not capable of appointing you as a shaliach. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin that way, and it seems that that it does work, that you could become an appointee of a Gentile. So yeah, I think Reb Stern doesn't qualify this either. But I'm gonna jump in here and I'm gonna say, clearly, if the Jewish debtor is in the wrong, he's trying to evade paying his debt, and you see a chilul Hashem here, and you can prevent the chilul Hashem by stepping in and helping the Gentile collect his debt, I would not hesitate to tell you, absolutely go ahead and help the Gentile collect his debt. It's, you have to appreciate that the time and place when this is being written, when there's oppression of Jews and there's the potential for Jews to get into serious, serious trouble for not paying back money that they don't have. So that's, I believe, the motivation behind this Rav Shulchan Aruch is that try not to get Jews killed, try not to get Jews thrown in prison. It doesn't apply today. If a Jew owes money and it's clear to you that he owes money, and you've been summoned by a Gentile to collect a debt that is owed to him by a Jew, you have every right, if you feel that the Gentile is in the right, you have every right to take the case. Okay. All right. Kamosha Kosov b'tikkunei shtaros, and it's very important to get the right nusach of a shtar harsha whenever you are properly appointed. And by the way, we mentioned yesterday that the minhag is no longer to write up a formal shtar harsha because it's already a convention, and that's something that he elaborates upon in the biurim. He says, "Ayin b'sefer nachla shiva simin memdalid." Imrei Yaakov just says you can find the proper nusach in the sefer called Nachala Shiva, which is sort of a go-to work that Rabbanim use whenever they need the proper nusach of a ksuva, of a tanoim, and so forth and so on. And so this is one of the shtaros that you, a heteriska, and so forth. So let's just take a look at this next biurim. Hareza osa mitzvah lahatzil ashuk miyad oshko. Then many times there is a mitzvah that when the creditor is not in the same city, or he's otherwise unable to collect the debt from the lova, then you do have a mitzvah to go ahead and help a guy collect his debts. Right? So, Tanan in Pirkei Avos, Perak Aleph Mishnah Ches, Al Tas Atzmacha Ko'orchei Hadayanim. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, "Do not make yourself like the lawyers." Okay, just to show you the text. Let's see. I'll bring it up on my phone. It'll be much easier, be much quicker. One sec. Because there's three things. I want to make sure I'm quoting it correctly. Avos, Perak Aleph. Here we go. This is Yehuda ben Tabai is the author of this statement, and he says, "Al tas atzmecha ko'orchei hadayanim." Do not make yourself like the organizers of judgment. That's literally what it means, but it really usually, an orech din in modern Hebrew is a lawyer. An advocate is basically, don't make yourself into an advocate. Yehuda ben Tabai was a judge. So he was basically saying is that don't try and fight for one side. You have to be objective. That when the litigants stand before you in judgment, they should both be evil in your eyes. In other words, you should assume the worst, that they're going to try and connive and distort in order to win. But once the judgment is over, you should look at them as both good, innocent people. In other words, you have to eliminate any suspicion from your mind. Provided that they accept judgment upon themselves. So there's a lot of stories about Yehuda ben Tabai that I've talked about in my Pirkei Avos shiur. We won't go into that now, but this is his statement. If you're a judge, you have to be objective. Don't try and advocate, even in your mind, for one side over the other. So Upirish HaRambam v'zel Lashono Ratza Lomar Lalamed Echad Mibale Hadin Taina Sheto Ilehu. In other words, not only mentally don't side with one over the other, but don't help one side by providing him with an argument that you think might help him. Like suggesting to him, oh, you should say this to bolster your claim. Or you should, when you want to counter that guy's statement, you should counter it with the following statement. And even if you know that the guy is in the right, in other words, you see very clearly that Reuven has taken Shimon to Beis Din, and Reuven is correct in his claims. You still, im kolze ein muterlo sheyilamadehu tainer shetatzilehu v'to'ilehu klal ad kan lashon. But you're still not allowed to feed Reuven the proper script that he should claim in court, because that's not correct. Now, certainly that's true if you're the judge, right? But what if you're what if you're just an innocent bystander and you see this case and you see that Reuven is in the right? Does that mean that you don't have a right to assist him in offering him the proper arguments that he should present before Beis Din? But he says, because of al-Zeh Rabbeinu Yonah Sham V'Zelu Shama. So Rabbeinu Yonah comments on this as follows. V'harambam zal perish al tas atzmecha ko'orchei hadayanim. When the Rambam talks about making yourself into an advocate, lo dubar bekan b'mishim alame taino shel sheker lechaver v'liton bahem. He says, he's certainly not referring to a person who is suggesting to make false arguments that are lies. That's certainly not what the Rambam is talking about. Ki adam zer rasha gamorhu, v'lo hutzrach lomer, ki ein la adam lasas kain, ki yachshaduhu b'yadabru alav, ki avera gedoli. He says, there's no need for Yehuda ben Tabai to say that you shouldn't lie. There's no reason for Yehuda ben Tabai to say that you shouldn't say untruthful statements, lest people suspect you of being biased. Right? That's not the concern. The concern is not that people are going to think that you're unbiased. The fact is that you're saying sheker, you're lying in order to be able to make money. He says that's certainly not what he's talking about. Ela shemisadulo ta'anosa. He says, but rather what it means is that you as just an advocate are expressing to him truthful claims that he could make that would make his case more convincing to the Beis Din. But even that, says the Rambam, you're not supposed to do. Uchehahu ma'aseh the Rabbi Yochanan b'maseches ksubas nun beis the mikara savar umibisar chalos isalem ulabasov savar adam chashuv shiny ad kam l'shama. He says there's a story in the Gemara in Maseches Ksubas where Rabbi Yochanan originally wanted to advocate on behalf of someone who was a friend of his. Let me just bring up the Gemara, that you can see it inside. Ksubas Nun Beis. 52. Doesn't say whether it's 52A or 52B. So let's second. Oh, wait a minute, it's Jochanan. Okay. Just see here. Let me make sure I have the correct. Did we say 52? Yeah. Nun Beis. Terchsuvas Nun Beis, right? Okay. So here's Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, the Gemara tells the story as follows. The relatives of Rabbi Yochanan had to take care of the wife of their father, who required treatment every day, and therefore her medical expenses were high. They came before Rabbi Yochanan to ask him what to do. He said to them, go and fix a lump sum with the doctor for his services. Treatment would then be considered as having a fixed cost, which is deducted from the ksuva. And then later, Rabbi Yochanan said in regret, we have made ourselves, we're talking about himself, I made myself like legal advisors, like an advocate who help people with their legal claims. The Gemara asks at the outset, what did he hold and ultimately what did he maintain? Gemara explains at the outset he held that one should act in accordance with the verse, do not hide from your own flesh, which indicates that one must help his relatives. And ultimately he held that an important person is different. If a man of stature offers assistance to his family in a manner that causes a loss to another individual, it appears as though he were unfairly favoring his relatives. So that's the story. What Rabbeinu Yonah is basically saying is, someone comes to you and says, look, I have this issue. I need money. And this guy, I feel, I think I have a legal issue where I can get money from this guy. What do you think? And to say to them, well, if you make this argument and that argument, you would be able to succeed. You perhaps will be able to succeed in court. And don't say this and don't say that. That's also not right to do. Even though you're not the judge, you're just trying to help a relative. He says, but helping a relative is not fair, is not proper, if objectively it could go the other way also. So that's the statement of Rabbeinu Yonah. So he says as follows. V'hinei lo zachisi kan lamod al divrei Rabboseinu harambam v'harabbeinu Yonah b'meh shekasvu da'afilu b'makom sheyada bo shehu ha'ashak v'shechaveru to'en alav sheker. He says, I don't understand how the Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah can write that you're not supposed to assist a person even when you know that he is the aggrieved party, even when you know that he has a right to collect money. He says, and basically the Rambam says, don't try to provide him with the proper things to say to the Rabbanim, to the Beis Din, even when you know it's true. He says, I don't understand, why should you desist from that? He says, aren't you doing a mitzvah? A guy is owed money, and he doesn't necessarily know how to express his argument in Beis Din. Isn't there a mitzvah that you would want to help him get the money that's owed to him? He says, and the Ramah himself writes that in Shulchan Aruch. The Rav Shulchan Aruch had quoted this, that if a person, it says in Yecheskel, don't butt into somebody else's business, but that's only when the guy can take care of himself. But if he can't take care of himself, he's not able to collect his own debts, you have a mitzvah to help him. Aval im osa kedei lahatzil ashuk miyad oshko mitzvah kavit. And therefore you're doing a mitzvah. V'ayin sham b'shach sifkat labedei beis divrei hakesef mishnah v'kasel v'zel shano. Masha kasel b'kesef mishnah t'ravayu isnu. Chol she'enu yachol lahotzim yad halovim mipnei alamuso al mipnei richo kamaka mitzvah kavit. The Shach says that if the creditor or the guy that's owed the money for any other reason has a difficult time extracting what is owed to him from the debtor, either because he's in another city or because the lov is an aggressive character and wants to try and wiggle his way out of paying his debt, he says, so the only person that he can stand up against is his creditor, but against you, he's not going to stand up against, because he knows that you're not going to tolerate his nonsense. So there you do have a mitzvah to get involved. V'hayamei is neged hamorsha kagon shamorsha hu adam chashuvo yodei asaka b'tachbulos l'chai nimtza tahavi kein mashakasbu hatois v'shetorech lahavi l'chavero ma'osav. He says there, Tosfos writes that if you try to help another person get what's rightfully his, she'ein chaver yochol litroch ad kan lashon, where your friend is not capable of getting the money that is rightfully his, then you have a mitzvah. Umevor midivreim shel harama behashach b'makom shu bo lahatzil ashak miyad oshko yesh bo mitzvah lo rak lahasio eitza shari el afilu lo bo be'atzma v'lito neged chaver shari mitzvah kavit. So you see from all of this discussion that not only is it not wrong to give a guy advice what he should say, but you can even proactively act as his representative and confront the debtor yourself and say to him, listen, maybe you can weasel out of it if because of the guy maybe doesn't have the savvy that I have. But I know you know that you owe the guy money, so you better pay up. He says, the fact that Rabbeinu Yonah brings that story about Rabbi Yochanan to prove the point, he says, I have a little bit of a problem with that. The Sham Isa, the Krevi, the Rabbi Yochanan, Hayalahu Eishes Avshahitzatricha Refuah. The whole story over there is that Rabbi Yochanan had some relatives who had a mother-in-law, or a stepmother, whatever it is, and she needed medicinal care, and that medicinal care was going to cost money. B'chol yom asu lakami de Rabbi Yochanan, amar lahu izilu kotsule midi lerofe. And basically, the way Rashi understands that statement is the doctor said, every day it costs X when you come to me for the medicine. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan asinu atzmenu ka'orchei hadayanim adkan. He says, and Rabbi Yochanan said, instead of having it as a per visit payment, have him put out a lump sum. That way, she could make a claim on her husband's estate and be able to extract money from the estate to pay for her medical services. He says, what happened was, I'm sorry. It's just the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan's relatives wanted to get out of having to pay for her medical bills. So Rabbi Yochanan gave them advice about how they could avoid halachically having to drain or exhaust the estate for paying for her medical expenses. He says, in other words, instead of having to, you see, when a woman's husband dies, according to the Gemara, she is entitled to live off of the estate in addition to collecting a lump sum from her ksuva. But that's only for her daily needs, for her food, her rent, and so forth. But if you could create a scenario where this is one lump sum that is owed to her, not part of her daily needs, so then that would have that expense would come out of her ksuva. So if, let's say, she's owed $50,000 for her ksuva, and the medical expenses are X amount per year, you would deduct that from the ksuva, and you wouldn't have to pay the doctor on a daily basis. That was what Rabbi Yochanan was essentially advocating should be done. So it turns out that Rabbi Yochanan's advice ended up costing this woman money, because instead of her getting it from the estate in addition to the ksuva, it was going to be deducted from her ksuva. He says, so in that situation, the woman did nothing wrong. This was probably a very nice almana. And Rabbi Yochanan, however, wanted to help his relatives save money from exhausting their estate and paying out for this almana additionally and on top of the ksuba. So therefore, she was not the person. It's not like Rabbi Yochanan was helping people, was helping someone to get money from someone who was being the bad guy, right? He says, and really, depending upon how you structured the medical charges, would determine whether there was a legal obligation for the relatives to pay it in addition to the ksuba, or for it being to be deducted from the ksuba. So Rabbi Yochanan came up with this, what we call in Hebrew, a patent. He came up with this ingenious idea how you could restructure the medical bills, like the billing code or whatever, in modern terminology, to make it come out of her ksuba so that the family could save money. But essentially, and by the way, both viewpoints were accurate. You could set up her medical expenses as a daily living expense, or you could set it up as an annual billing right? Which would come from her ksuva and not from the estate. And so he just came up with an idea to save the family money. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan regretted doing it, because he basically took sides in an argument that wasn't his. In other words, why? Just because they're my family, I should help them save money from this almana? That's not right. He realized that he did something that he felt uncomfortable with.
Particularly because of how the Torah speaks about protecting the almana. I mean, that makes it even worse.
No, he doesn't. He hasn't made that argument yet. The point that he's making is that even if the woman wasn't an almana, Paul, but the fact is, let's say your brother-in-law is in a conflict with another guy, a financial conflict,
right.
And it's not clear cut that there's a good guy or a bad guy. There's different my language. There's different stages of gray. There's different shades of gray.
Right.
So you could give him a piece of good advice to help him win. That's not necessarily an ethical thing to do just because he's your brother-in-law, that you should help him if the guy has a way of arguing his case as well. So that's the point that we're making. Give us a chance to finish this. We'll finish this Amir Hashem tomorrow. Okay. All right. Thanks for bearing with us.